Kennedy presented himself as the anti-Eisenhower. And what he said to the nation was, we need a young, vibrant, activist president. And it was the perfect campaign strategy.
John Kennedy is elected in 1960, the dawn of a new decade. There's this great juxtaposition by an older president leaving office and this new, younger, vigorous person succeeding him. And Kennedy, in some ways, was the first president to be a media creation.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
And so he comes into office with this young wife, these young children, and it's a completely different world all of a sudden, almost out of nowhere.
He was a reader, he was an intellectual, and that was a strength. He was also vastly inexperienced, and it took him a little while to get going. He, like Roosevelt, brought to Washington the smartest people he could find.
One of the character traits that President Kennedy had that I think helped lead to success was his willingness to take advice. You know, some leaders know what they know, but not necessarily know what they don't know. And President Kennedy understood that he was relatively inexperienced, and one of the really smart things he did was surround himself with really experienced people.
One of the great strengths of Kennedy was that he was a young man and able to learn.
There's been a lot written and said about President Kennedy and his leadership and his performance, and we can't help but wonder the extent to which some of that is perhaps overstated as a function of the way in which he was assassinated. But what we do know is that President Kennedy was a visionary.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
What would have happened if he had lived? You know, historians will debate that forever. But we can only talk about the past. We don't know the what-ifs. And yet we can see that Kennedy was moving somewhere.
President Kennedy put, for the first time, some electricity into the White House. People wanted to know what was going on with the first family. And I think helped fundamentally change the way in which people view the president. I think President Kennedy's lasting impact on the presidency was the way in which he made it seem larger than life. But he was able to create a narrative about the presidency and a narrative about his family that has endured for the 55 years since his assassination.
I would characterize the Kennedy presidency as one of promise of unfulfilled potential. But whether those promises would have been fulfilled, we will never know.